Wherever God has placed us, we can find beauty and goodness and wisdom. And there's not one country who owns it. God has blessed all cultures and countries. And wherever we can find it, that's where we also belong. So wherever I am placed, I'll bring myself fully there, mentally, intellectually, emotionally. And God has placed me here.
On In Good Faith, we believe that all faith traditions have something to teach us about how God is working in the world and in our lives. So join us as we listen and learn. Remember junior high school? Well, I've heard people say there's not enough money in the world to pay them to relive junior high. I sort of relate. You're trying to find your place in this awkward time of change and wondering if you belong, trying not to stick out or to be noticed as different in any way. So that really came home to me when I moved from Indiana to Utah, and the first day of school suddenly realized that though striped bell-bottoms were the thing in Bloomington, Indiana, they were not in my new place. But it was so simple the next day to just show up in jeans. I could change that and really fit in. But what if you can't change the thing that people are staring at you for or saying, oh, you're different than the rest of us? That could be your race, the accent you have, or in the case of our guest today, it's because of an obvious part of her religious tradition. Zeyneb Sayilgan came from a Turkish Muslim background, was raised in Germany in a very secular society, and then finally came to the U.S. And I was so fascinated to find out that her first experiences with being different started with that same junior high era when she decided it was time, culturally appropriate in her tradition, to start wearing a hijab or a headscarf. And that's just part of many Muslim women's traditions, not all. She definitely did not fit the norm. Dr. Zeyneb Sayilgan is the Muslim scholar at the Institute for Islamic Christian Jewish Studies in Baltimore. And this experience she's talking about of being born and raised in Germany as the daughter of Muslim immigrants from Turkey really has informed her work on religious literacy and community building.
So what it was like, I think it was hard in the beginning. I love Germany. It's one of my places that I call home. My family, friends all live there. I majored in German literature. I love the German culture, the German old cities and all of that. But I think it's still hard to be a Muslim in Germany as a Muslim woman in Germany because religion is not very much out there in the public sphere. And even if you are a regular churchgoer as a Christian and you bring that up in conversation, it would cause for some interesting reactions. So as a Muslim child, I grew up in the public school system and was already visibly by my name, by my whole being. I was out there. I started wearing my headscarf, which is an expression of my Muslim faith, early in middle school. So I've experienced a lot of bullying and discrimination. And that was, I think, hard as a Muslim child to see that adults who are educators, who are supposed to be supportive and encouraging in your educational journey, actually were very belittling, were discriminating. It was a painful experience because any child wants to belong and wants to feel part of their community. And when you get the signal from the larger mainstream society that you are not welcome the way you are because you are too different or you are too religious, you appear too religious, then that, of course, creates a lot of hurt. I think I still carry bitterness and resentment with me at times, looking back that I felt my country did not see my potential or didn't appreciate me. And I think it's their loss. And I eventually left because I faced challenges, obstacles in the workforce. Trying to apply as a scholar, as an academic was still very hard. It's become a little bit easier, but as a Muslim woman who is dressed in a certain way, and when you have your picture on your job application, Even if you have just a Muslim sounding name, you experience a lot of rejection. Or I had people in interviews telling me, take off your scarf, or principals calling me into their office. If you don't give up your Muslim identity, you'll face a lot of trouble. So that was this constant harassment, discrimination on the job market, in the school system. And that is still a reality. I'm very much in touch with my friends and family in Germany, and there's still a lot of hurt and disappointment. I'm 45 now. After all these years, we're not making enough progress. I think still have changed positively. I don't want to sound too pessimistic. So that was the climate that I grew up in. I wish I could say, oh, everything was just rosy. And of course, I have a lot of good experiences. Just being as a Muslim was not something that was embraced.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that discrimination. And when you first mentioned bullying, I thought, well, I hope the teachers came to the rescue. But when you mentioned, oh, that was the adults, that's very eye-opening.
Especially those were the teachers who would hand out the diary of the Anne Frank and that we would read, but couldn't understand that they are inflicting the same injury on other children.
How different was it when you came to the U.S.?
So it's been now almost 20 years. I came here after I finished my graduate studies in Germany. And so far, I have not lived in all parts of the United States. And I can't speak for all Muslim women, but my own particular experience was a positive one. That when I came, that my difference and diverse background was something that was valued, welcomed, appreciated, and seen as a richness to the academic field. So the languages that I spoke, the cultures that I was connected and immersed in, and I think that's the beauty of immigrants, that they bring to the country, their rich background, the languages, the experiences. And so I, as a Muslim woman, as a Muslim student, I had good experiences.
You easily could have said, I am just going to head on my path, keep my head down, and not engage with this discrimination or this misunderstanding. But you really have taken part in what feels like to me is trying to create some dialogue and some understanding. Was there some moment, or did you just feel that from the beginning as a sense of mission?
I think a lot of us bring ourselves to our work. So my autobiography, my own personal experience with growing up as a Muslim shaped my interest in who I wanted to become. I think I bring myself fully to this work because I embody this dialogue. I have a very German critical mind. There was always a sense of suspicion towards religion. And I always feel the internal dialogue that I'm making. In a sense, I embody the conversation between the East and the West and Islam and the West. I can anticipate the questions and objections, the conversation between the secular and the sacred. And so I feel that's a blessing. There are these two aspects of me who want to make sense of faith and religion in the modern world, about tradition and science and the conversation between religion and science. Growing up in Germany was truly a privilege, a blessing really, that I want to use that religious language, because it helped me to really appreciate and understand where people are coming from, because I'm not somebody who is a person of faith, of conviction, because they were told or their ancestors,
Right.
passed it on to them. But I grew up in an environment, educational system that values critical thinking, analytical thinking, and rationality. I mean, you think about all the German philosophers and all of that. So for me, my whole journey, actually, I realized if I don't tell my story, my narrative, nobody else will. And that gradually brought me to this whole work of religious literacy and interreligious understanding, because I realized in my communities there's a lot of misconceptions about the other. And I wanted to be somebody who brings communities closer, who helps them understand each other. And I saw my own context as an asset. And I wanted people to understand, to see the beauty that I'm experiencing, because I couldn't recognize my religion in that persistent negative portrayal of Islam. And I would be scared and run away if that's what Islam is about. So I thought to myself, instead of complaining about the darkness, you have to do something about it. And so I think that very much brought me to the academic field of Christian-Muslim relations, in particular, interreligious understanding, and also learning from my non-Muslim students. What is it that we Muslims are doing wrong, or what can we do better? I think that's then everything came beautifully together. I love the research, I love the teaching and the community building, and that's what brought me to this work.
You used a phrase I hope that I can use more in my life, which is religious literacy. That is what we do on In Good Faith. We're trying to encourage that, but I don't know that we've used those two words together. Yeah. That we as just human beings become literate in the religious beliefs and practices of our neighbors all around us. Mm-hmm. And probably, I'm guessing you've seen some people even abandon their faith or their tradition just because life was easier. And that is an option any of us have. We say, I'm just not going to stick with this. It's causing me too many problems. But I admire your approach. You co-edited Faithful Neighbors with Robert Heaney, and I'm wondering, in putting together a collection of essays like that, what did you learn from the people who contributed about living together with people of different beliefs, more of that religious literacy?
I think a lot of what I've learned in one of the essays is that there is sometimes this anxiety. I'm not religiously literate enough to enter into a dialogue with another religious person. I don't know enough about my own religion, about the other religion, or I'm not an expert to come into this conversation. And what actually studies show is you don't need to be an expert. The beauty of dialogue is when you come and enter this conversation, you enter into a dialogue with yourself first. You become more self-aware of who you are, more self-conscious. You more step into a dialogue and trying to understand, what are my values, my beliefs? How do I look at this issue? And another fear is that people think, I'm going to lose my religion, my identity in the process of dialogue, which again is confirmed as not true. In fact, dialogue brings you closer to yourself and brings you also closer to the other, because the other, your conversation partner, then encourages you to look more deeply into your tradition, into your own world. And I think that for me was the beauty, that even now those studies show that you become a better practitioner, a better religious believer. And even if you're not affiliated with any religious tradition, you become a better global citizen. If we see that we have a certain responsibility towards each other, to know how does the other orient themselves in the world? Well, how do they think about some of the most existential questions or some of the shared human struggles? I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's not something that only religious people should do. It's something that I would love more people to talk in schools, in other institutions, in libraries, because religion is still meaningful and is important to a lot of people. And we should ask, why is that? How is it that this tradition continues to sustain for 1,500 years, or Christianity or other tradition, big part of the human family? I'm a mother, and I would love for my daughter to have a basic understanding, some literacy about the people, the fellow human beings with whom she shares this planet. And what are their favorite holidays? What are their favorite moments? What do they care about?
That's curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity, just be simple curiosity. And what a beautiful thing if we can have more of that in healthy ways, in respectful ways, in civic dialogue. And oftentimes with religion in the public sphere, we hear the loud and extreme voices, but those are not the people who I see in my day-to-day living. They're the people who are extremely kind and loving and love their traditions. And I think those voices I would love to see more up and be more confident in sharing now.
You're affiliated faculty with Virginia Theological Seminary. I wonder what courses you teach and what are they, as a theological seminary, hoping that you can share as a Muslim and a scholar with their students?
What I traditionally teach are introductory classes on Islam or chaplaincy classes. So I had chaplains approach me, or seminarians, Or I have Muslim patients in my hospital or in my hospice. How do I serve them? How do I care for them? So I think it just comes to this basic question about how do I care for all of God's creation? We are becoming more diverse as a nation, as a world. People encounter diversity and difference in different settings, in schools, in colleges, hospitals, prisons. I would say any religious leader in formation needs to have those skills in place to be a future leader.
This is In Good Faith. I'm Stephen Kapp Perry. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, this is Stephen Kapp Perry, and I'd love to recommend one of our BYU Radio family of podcasts for you. It's called The Appleseed. It's filled with stories for you and your family. Every episode features really excellent, nationally known storytellers sharing all kinds of folk tales, fairy tales, personal and family stories. It's great to put on and listen to for road trips or bedtime for kids, or anytime you want something to get the whole family not only listening, but then those stories generate conversations. And it's so easy to say, hey, do you have a story about this? Or, oh, that reminds me of when Grandma said, or whatever it might be. Check out the Appleseed podcast. You'll have fun, and you might learn some new stories from your own family members. Welcome back to In Good Faith. Do you have a sense that you've been led to what you're doing, that God is working in your life to put you where you are? Do you look at it that way, or do you see it differently?
When I was at the seminary, I heard a lot of the students always say, it's my calling, my vocation. Oh, God called me to do this work. And they were lawyers or doctors, and they've given up everything. And I've never heard that language in that particular way. But I definitely, as a Muslim person, I think that our lives are not just happening coincidentally. Everything in our lives is a sign, a miraculous event unfolding something about the divine. If we can approach it as a letter from God and try to read and reflect and ponder about the meanings, why did this happen to me? What's the reason? What's the purpose? And can I now take this experience and write a beautiful ending with God's permission, taking all that amazing experience, the painful and the joyful. And I think that's where our freedom lies. I can either be a victim or label myself as a victim, or say, no, I have agency. I can decide what to do with that painful experience or that sadness or even the injustice that I faced. But how can I make this now a work of justice, a work of compassion, a work of forgiveness? So I think that's where I landed now in my humble experience. I see it now, I see everything and think, oh, it's perfect. It's all what I needed to experience to now move forward and write that beautiful ending. And I think God is working in these events. Like, these events are not happening without wisdom, without purpose. When I look at the cosmos, I see in everything always beauty, wisdom, and purpose. It cannot be that the highest level of life, the human being, just like lives their lives and there's no deeper meaning to it. This is something that I just don't embrace. God was working in all of this, and I couldn't always understand the divine work, but it makes you more mature. And a life lived without suffering or pain or sadness is not a human life lived fully or experienced fully, I feel, because the spectrum of human life is the sun and the moon. It's the lunar and the solar. It's not always the happy and the rosy. And often growth happens in the very painful moments in your life. And I've experienced that. I still continue to experience that. And that's what I would love to convey. It doesn't mean that in darkness or pain or suffering, God's creative work stops. He didn't abandon me. He didn't reject me. In fact, there's still growth happening. If we can see that, open our hearts, I think that's a beautiful insight to come.
I really appreciate, I think, the patience you've had to develop when people speak out of misunderstanding or misconceptions, and they just don't know yet. But that's still very inconvenient for the people who are the brunt of that. So one thing I would love to ask here is, what do you love most about Islam, about the teachings and the traditions and your faith, what brings you joy and what makes you just very happy that you're part of that?
There's so much to share, but I feel for me, Islam is a tradition that really addresses all my needs and nourishes all my needs, whether it's the physical, the spiritual, the intellectual, the emotional. I feel truly sustained and strengthened and nourished. And there's always a sweet challenge in Islam. It's something that there is that sweet struggle and that leads to transcendent of the ego and self-transformation. That I really appreciate. I love also the social aspect of it. How when you go into the community, you see the sea of diverse people, yet you can share in the most sacred moments together. It gives you a shared, sacred, holy language and a shared orientation to the world. And I remember this one incident. I was in the hospital and it was prayer time. So I found that beautiful interfaith chapel and I entered, and then a nurse came in and I could see she's from Somalia and it's just her background. And she asked me, "Are you starting to pray?" And I said, "Yes." And then she joined me and we were praying together. And here we are, like complete two strangers, but we could share that most sacred, most intimate moment together. And we had this shared vocabulary, the language, the rituals. We could talk about death and life, and we could understand each other. I mean, it was a powerful moment for me, a testament to the unity that Islam has created. And that I found deeply moving and touching. And I love being in that cosmopolitan community. And I host a women's gathering every Wednesday, a spiritual gathering. And it's just always astonishes me. I'm like with these strangers, but we talk about lives, about death, about suffering, about painful experiences, about the raw things. And where can you do that if not in this kind of spiritual community that allows you to address the whole human experience? You know, usually you in public life, you celebrate the accolades, the birthdays, the graduations, but where can you really be totally you? And I think those are in those religious spaces. You also talk about the dimension of the unseen, the afterlife, the pain that is unseen, the sadness, the sorrow. And for me, that is a very beautiful, very powerful element in the Islamic tradition that doesn't shy away to talk about the difficult topics with strangers. and I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds like a lovely meeting that I will never be invited to, but I'm I'm glad it's happening. So you're raising your children in yet a different place than you were raised in, which is a different place than your parents were raised in. And so here is Islam and this tradition traveling through different cultures, societies. Are you hopeful for your children's future as Muslims in the States here?
You know, the discourse, and I think that came with modernity and the nation state, that your identity is tied to a territory or that your identity needs to be tied to a place or country. And as I studied the Quran and my own tradition, I actually realized there's even no geography is not that important, meaning that your religious core cannot be narrowed down. In fact, I have 3 passports, German, Turkish, American, but none of them captures my being. It means that I cannot say my sense of belonging is only tied to this one place or space or territory. The Quran makes you so much bigger. You are a human being that has a spirit. And that spirit cannot be contained by a certain place or territory. It's still important, the place. We are spatial beings. We start somewhere. But the spirit is a non-material entity, is wider than the earth. So what the Quran refers to, you are bigger than the earth. You have to expand. I think there's an invitation to expand your humanity, to expand your sense of self. Because you are body, you are spirit, your heart, but you're not a territorial being only. And I think a lot of times in my childhood or upbringing, it was like, are you German? Are you Turkish? Are you this? Where do you belong? And you realize, especially with an immigrant upbringing, that you love all of these places. You know, you can't be contained by walls and borders. And in fact, that's a very modern and recent notion, which limits actually people. In the Islamic tradition, this idea of you are a heavenly being because you are going to return to your celestial origins. So I'm hopeful. And the notion of home in the Islamic tradition, we are called to be in this world like a traveler or stranger. We should not fully settle. And there's a beauty in that. You should be comfortable being in the in-between because you're constantly in this mode of traveling and learning and feeling a little bit unsettled and feeling okay of being a stranger in the world, which sounds negative in a way, but it's not, because when you are a traveler, you try to show up as your best self. You try to make the most of every moment, but you also know that you can depart anytime. So for me as a mother now, I'm trying to say wherever we are, wherever God has placed us, we can find beauty and goodness and wisdom. And there's not one country who owns it. God has blessed all cultures and countries with beauties and wisdom and creativity. And wherever we can find it, that's where we also belong. So wherever I am placed, I'll bring myself fully there, mentally, intellectually, emotionally. And God has placed me here.
This episode was produced by Heather Bigley. Our production team also includes Aaliyah Ebert, Katarina Martinic, Soraya Pearson, and James Sturdivant. Our post-production team includes DJ Cromarty, Gracie Davis, Mark Hansen, and Lawrence Sandberg. Spread the word about In Good Faith by leaving a comment and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. In Good Faith is committed to the idea that we all benefit from hearing people of widely varying backgrounds share their personal experience with faith and belief. We think people with such experience deserve some of our best listening. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Our YouTube page is youtube.com/in-good-faith. In Good Faith is a production of BYU Radio. I'm Stephen Cap Perry. I hope you join us again soon, right here in Good Faith.